Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this paranormal pit stop. Tonight, we'll be exploring a popular cultural heritage site located along Colonial Parkway on Jamestown Island in the James River, around 2.5 miles southwest of Williamsburg, Virginia. Recognized as the first permanent English settlement in North America and purported to harbor its fair share of ghostly activity, are you prepared to brave the history and hauntings of Jamestown? Historically, when around 100 colonists were led to the region by renowned explorer Captain John Smith, wary of the possibility of attack by either Spanish or Powhatan, they would set to work on what was at the time called James Fort, which was finished on May 14th of 1607. And while relations between settlers and Powhatan were initially friendly, tensions would rise when the foreigners began demanding food from the native people, resulting in heavy defiance. From 1609 to 1610, the budding community would run dry of supplies, resulting in a period recognized as the starving time, from which only 60 colonists survived until additional numbers arrived from England. And in 1613, the legendary Pocahontas was captured and held for ransom in Jamestown, during which time she was encouraged to convert to Christianity, and in 1614 would marry tobacco farmer John Rolfe while receiving baptism under the Christian name Rebecca. In 1622, following a Powhatan attack that left 347 colonists dead, the settlement was ravaged by famine, and in 1624, Virginia would be officialized as an English royal colony, with Jamestown as its capital, under King James I, resulting in the assumption of local authority from the London Company by the Crown, and in the community receiving the support it desperately needed to flourish. In 1644, further conflict with Powhatan would result in around 500 colonist fatalities. In 1676, during Bacon's Rebellion, a number of Jamestown's original structures were burned to the ground, though most were later rebuilt, and preceding a second razing in 1698, the community was relocated the following year. After its supersession as capital, Jamestown's economy and populace would decline rapidly, with its church services continuing until the 1750s before the parish's abandonment, and for a time, a majority of its lands would be owned by the Ambler and Travis families. In 1861, amidst the Civil War, Confederate William Allen, who owned Jamestown Island, would amass his own force of 1,200 men on the stretch in order to blockade the James River and Richmond from Union assault, though following a Union victory at Yorktown in April of 1862 and a Confederate retreat at Williamsburg on May 5th of the same year, Allen's forces would eventually abandon the island, and, ironically, it would become a refuge and meeting place for those escaping enslavement. To further, in 1862, Allen would send a troop of men to assess damages to the island, but they were all killed on sight by former slaves. In 1892, Jamestown was purchased by Mr. and Mrs. Edward Barney, who, the following year, would donate 22.5 acres of its land, including the ruined church tower, to the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, or now, more simply, Preservation Virginia. By the late 19th century, the island's western shore had eroded to the point at which it was believed the site of the former James Fort was completely submerged by water, and in 1900, a seawall was completed to prevent further erosion. In 1930, Colonial National Monument was authorized. In 1934, the National Park Service would acquire the remaining 1,500 acres of Jamestown Island, while partnering with Preservation Virginia. Archaeological excavations of the expanse were started in 1936, and in 1940, the ex-community was designated as Jamestown National Historic Site. In 1994, a series of archaeological studies were launched through the area. In 1996, remains of the original James Fort were rediscovered, and while these projects were initially spec'd on a 10-year timeline, in light of said discoveries, work has continued into the present, with teams since mapping out thousands of notable points, including foundations, wells, ditches, post holes, graves, and pits, all while recovering over 3 million artifacts. To this day, research efforts are ongoing in Jamestown, which remains open to visitors and offers an assortment of tours, events, displays, and reenactments tied to the settlement's past. Not surprising in the least, Jamestown has long been shrouded in tales of the supernatural and chilling ghost stories, with those frequenting the island reporting disembodied voices, screaming and crying, strange orbs of light visible to the naked eye, and shadowy figures that stalk the living. Through the starving time, settlers had to make difficult choices, including the consumption of local mice and snakes, and even of horses, cats, dogs, and of other pets for survival's sake. And while obtained documentation gets fairly grim, no evidence of cannibalism was ever uncovered. That is, until 2012, when the remains of a 14-year-old human girl dubbed Jane were unearthed in a debris pit next to horse and dog bones. Disturbingly, all remains found carried signs of being butchered, and some exploring Jamestown today have described being overcome with a panicked feeling of survival, often accompanied by guilt or even nausea, that many attribute to the emotions felt by those forced to make choices beyond our comprehension. Also reported across Jamestown are objects sighted moving on their own, archaeological tools found scattered about, and instances of artifacts at dig sites that seemingly uncover themselves as if wanting to be found. The Ambler House, which was constructed through the 1750s, was a two-story Georgian-style mansion that was all but destroyed in 3 separate fires before its abandonment. History and legend intertwined to tell the story of Lady Lydia Ambler, who, in August of 1776, married a young soldier named Alexander Maupin, who left to fight in the American Revolution and never returned. It's said that Lydia was always on the lookout for her love, and even after Benedict Arnold burned their house to the ground, that she simply had it rebuilt and continued to wait patiently. Sadly, after some time, Maupin ceased communications with Lydia, leading to the realization that he'd only married her for her money. And distraught, heartbroken, and angry, it's said she walked the James River before drowning herself in despair. Many claim Lydia's spirit remains, and both within the Ambler House as well as along the banks of the James, a handful of accounts tell of encounters with a spectral woman in Revolutionary War-era garments, bearing her likeness that seemingly enraged even in death. Also described from the Ambler House are odd flickering lights and swirls of inexplicable mist. Beneath the Ambler House lies a mass grave uncovered through aforementioned archaeological efforts, and most theorize remains within belong to those who perished through this starving time. A number of tales tell the restless spirits of all those taken too soon to hunger remain, and near, many have reported encounters with emaciated entities or with ghostly skeletons that appear after dark, and a handful have even described feeling phantom hunger aches severe enough to leave them doubled over. Reported at the visitor center are doors that open and close on their own, lights that flicker inexplicably, alarms that sound without cause, and terrifying instances in which island goers are hit with strange pains so intense that they've started towards the hospital only to find the pains dissipate upon leaving the property. Lastly, across the whole of Jamestown, full-bodied apparitions in clothing spanning the 17th and 18th centuries have been spied, as have phantoms clad in Civil War uniforms, and several have told of watching what they believed at the time were battle reenactments, only to have entire troops vanish on them in the blink of an eye. Thanks for tuning in for this Paranormal Pit Stop. If you enjoyed our histories and ghost stories, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, throw us a like, and share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. We'll see you next time.